I think in order to deal with issues of fragmentation, there's a variety of instruments which can be used there. If one go back to 2012, for the OMD, which has been established, is not only one element there, in which requires going back and having to subject to conditionality. There are also other tools there which allows precautionary financing instruments to open them but not to use them. So there are tools already out there, and these tools have been reviewed within the mandate. And there are new tools which are currently thought about, which will need to comply to certain rules, and also which needs to have to go through the legal process.
Let us look into that comment coming out of Sintra here, that the new tool should have no limits. Would you agree?
Well, what is this tool about? It's also to help that if and as financial markets try to test the tool, that one has enough firepower to lean against it. It's not that the spreads currently as they are would be justified all by economic fundamentals. Quite definitely, the financial market want to test out how far and how long the central bank would go. And if one wants to avoid such a testing, then one has to make it open-ended, and this is what has happened.
Let's look at the interest rate path, because I've been speaking to Pierre Wunsch, for example, yesterday here on the ground, who says that the first 200 basis points might be actually a no-brainer in terms of rate hike. What is your vision about the interest rate trajectory?
Well, my thinking goes more along where is the neutral interest rate in real terms and in nominal terms. And if in nominal terms it is, let's say, 150 basis points, then it means we have to look at the effective inflation rate at this moment. And if the effective inflation rate is 8%, then we have a highly negative real interest rate. So this shows that we have to go beyond it if one wants to address inflation correctly.
Governor, can I ask you about the runway that the ECB has at this point? Because it feels as though it's a very time-limited window for the ECB to hike rates, that we might be just pushing into a recession around the corner. Can you comment on the amount of time the ECB has at this stage?
I think there's sufficient time. If and as we will hike in a few days, we will hike in September. And at this time, then we will have to make an assessment where the economic development is going and where the inflation stands. And afterwards, there's ample of room to hike in 0.25 and 0.5 levels to whatever rate we think and consider reasonable, given where we want to address an overheated inflationary process.
Governor, we've also seen synchronized action by central banks globally at this point, if not from the ECB yet. What do you think that means in terms of demand coming off the boil? Because markets are thinking that we may have already gone peak inflation at this point. Is there any suggestion, at least here in Europe, that we're getting close to peak inflation?
There are indications that towards autumn we may have peak inflation and goes back then. And at this moment, we may also have more clarity what drives inflation currently, which is still very much energy, but also other commodities. And by this time, I think we'll see how this is going. And also, importantly, in Europe, currently, we don't see any hike on wages. So the inflation wage spiral is currently not visible. This gives optimism that we may peak later this year, and afterwards we will have a reduction. Some will be purely mechanical because the base effect goes. Some will be economical if and as the real developments are also softening down, so we'll have a smooth landing.
Governor, good morning. I want to take it back to the anti-fragmentation tool in the works and ask, how do you avoid moral hazard setting in with this new tool?
Well, the moral hazard for this, as you know, we have the New Generations EU fund, which is there in order to deal with some of the economic struggles and to support a reform program. And the other part is, and I think this is what has to be there, that any instrument will make clear at the end of the day, there needs to be a fiscal backstop. So at the end of the day, governments needs to have done their homework if and as they rely on it. And I'm sure also the new instrument will have something along these lines to say, here we help out, because we have an incomplete monetary system. This requires some additional instruments, but if and as the financial situation of a country, the fiscal situation, the debt situation is unsustainable, they have to attack this. There's nothing, how to say, what a monetary system can do in this case.
Let me bring you back to the interest rate path, because you're saying that the neutral rate is roughly at 150 basis points, and clearly we're still in very much negative rate territory if we're lifting it just to that level. So what do you think will be, what do you envision in terms of rates for next year?
The rates for next year, if and as we would have continued high inflation, would have to go quite likely above the 150 basis point of the nominal rate. But we will have to determine in autumn how the rates are going, whether 150 is sufficient or whether we have to go beyond if and as the inflation dynamics doesn't come down.